Welcome back, everyone. I hope you guys had a tasty lunch and enjoyed the Greenspun courtyard, including all those weird bird noises. Do people know what that is? So it's like a deterrent so pigeons don't, defecate all over the solar panels and then they can't convert the sun's energy. So they recorded screaming bald eagles, and those are the screeching noises you hear. And that keeps the pigeons, I mean, it's pretty clever, but if you didn't know that, it's kind of weird to be sitting there and like, what? It's like Jurassic Park in here, but anyway, so I hope you had a good tasty lunch and got your sensories all filled with noises and good stuff, and you got to connect and ideate with one another. And I'm very excited to kind of kick off our afternoon session now. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and that is Lauren Knott from TAC, which is a Technical Assistant Collaborative. TAC was part of the community process to create the Southern Nevada Plan to End Youth Homelessness in 2018. Lauren led a wide range of community meetings, both big and small, worked with community experts to explore local data, shared best practices with us from other communities, and helped us think through tough problems and ideas for solutions, and produced our final plan document in 2018. Lauren has over 13 years of experience working on youth homelessness in the areas of policies and practices. She has extensive knowledge of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, otherwise HUD programs, serving low-income populations. Lauren is one of the lead TA providers for HUD's Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, working with communities to draft plans to end youth homelessness. She also leads TAC's other efforts on youth homelessness, including facilitating community planning processes, like the one we did with her, developing products for community use, like our plan, and helping communities ensure youth voice is central in their strategies. Thank you, Lauren, for flying out all the way from Boston to be here with us today. Lauren will be providing us with some context from the Southern Nevada Plan to End Youth Homelessness, as well as some ideas to spark our afternoon discussion. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. I didn't know Arash was going to read that, or I would have written something more interesting. Okay, so like Arash said, I've been asked to give a little refresher on the plan that was written in 2018 to offer some context for our afternoon conversation. So Arash mentioned it a little bit, but just to give a little background on TAC, since we are here from Boston and y'all might not know who we are. So we're a nonprofit consulting firm that works with communities on writing plans to end homelessness among many subpopulations, but my particular work is with youth and young adults. In 2018, like Arash said, we were hired to facilitate the process. So myself and two other TAC folks came out for 6 or 7 months every month in the summer to do that plan with you. I remember when I first met Arash and Melissa, and they asked me when we pulled in, did you leave anything in your car? And I was like, what do you mean? Like something that might explode. And that was my new understanding about the amount of heat that y'all get in the summer. So I'm someone that likes to ground these conversations in data and what young people, who's in your system, and what might be some of their characteristics that might be important to our conversations. So just a few slides about that data. And before we get started, the data comes from your Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS. So that is the system that all of the providers that serve people experiencing homelessness, they put that data into the system, and then it's available for your community to pull out for charts like this. And so I just chose a few demographics that I thought would be helpful. One thing for the first one is gender. So this is gender of youth and young adults. And another thing, it's in calendar year 2021. So it's like just January to October of this year. And these are also young people that were in your crisis system. So emergency shelter, street outreach, transitional housing, those sorts of settings. So you can see that 58% of your system is male. which is a little different than it was in 2018 when we did the plan. It skewed a little more of young people identifying as male. And HUD has a new data standard this year. So every so often, HUD updates how they track data for communities. And there's a new piece of a gender other than singularly female or male. So it's trying to capture young people who are gender nonconforming, non-binary, and might not identify as transgender, right? Which was one of the other categories that they had. And there's, I think, yes, the gender other than singularly female or male, there used to be one that was questioning, and now that is included in that one. So what's interesting here too is the smaller amount, right? So transgender and a gender other than male or female is only at about 2%. But we know nationally that young people experiencing homelessness, about 40% identify as LGBTQ. And when we did your plan in 2018, you had about 1% of young people identifying other than female or male. And so you've doubled. I wouldn't say that the population has changed much, but perhaps your community is getting a little better at capturing the data, maybe through better training or better environments for asking those questions. Maybe the YAC has informed how that stuff's being asked. So this is all like, it's really great to see that share increasing because it means young people are feeling safe to identify that gender, which informs housing and services that are available to them. So the next piece I pulled out was race and ethnicity. And this might be new for some of you that kind of live in HMIS, because most of the time we see these charts, race and ethnicity are two separate charts. But y'all have an awesome HMIS system that was able to pull these two demographics together, which I think offers a more full picture of someone's identity. Very frequently we're like, oh, the system is X% Latinx or X% Black, but it doesn't account for how race and ethnicity might interact within someone's identity. So it's interesting to see these things together on a chart. And I think when I look at this, right, I see that Black, non-Hispanic, Latinx young people are almost half your system. But I also might think about how this compares to other places that young people like show up in your community. Like, what does this look like against your school system data, right? To see like how your community is capturing young people experiencing homelessness like within the data and who is ultimately ending up in your homeless system. So if like your school district is skews more young people who identify as Latinx, but then your homeless system doesn't. You know, what's the data telling you? So then some additional demographics. About 18% of your system of young people experience chronic homelessness. So that's young people with a disability who experience homelessness continuously for a year or have 4 episodes over the course of 3 years that add up to a year. So that's a HUD definition. It's a little bit complicated. And I would say that nationally, young people experiencing homelessness are usually a pretty low number. The way young people experience homelessness isn't usually such a continuous amount of time or such a great amount of time. And I don't have the number at the top of my head, but your number feels a little higher than many communities. So that young people are experiencing homelessness for longer periods of time here, perhaps. 46% of young people report a disabling condition. So that's mental disabilities, physical disabilities, developmental disabilities. That's all one bucket. And 11% of youth were minors when they entered the project. So they either stayed in the project through their 18th birthday, but that's also a little bit of a drop since the 2018 plan as well. Minors made up more of your system then. So just to make y'all think as we start talking in a little bit about what innovations to address the data that you're seeing. So a snapshot of how youth and young adults enter and exit your system. So this is pretty similar to nationally and your community in 2018, but about 62% of youth and young adults report interpersonal conflict as the reason for experiencing homelessness. So this statistic comes from the front door of your system. Everyone receives an assessment when they enter your system, and that assessment has questions. They're yes/no questions that have the interpersonal conflict in italics underneath the percentage are things that people can say yes or no to. So 62% of young people in your system said yes to one of those interpersonal conflicts. And some of them said yes to many of them. So you can see that even interpersonal conflict has intersection. 22% of youth exit to a rental with no ongoing subsidy. So that's young people that just leave your system and get rehoused in a private apartment. Another place this stat could be showing up is young people exiting your system to live with a roommate. So it'd be interesting to pull that data apart to see how successful shared housing is or could be in your community. I know for myself, shared housing has been a permanent thing in my life. I had a roommate when I was 22 and permanently with a roommate now. So 38% of youth and young adults exit to live with family and friends. This is a stark decrease from the plan. With the plan, it was almost double. It was in the 60% range for young people that are exiting to live with family and friends. And as I was thinking about this, I think about some of the things we talked about in the morning, with how like COVID has changed the way that people can live with family or friends in a safe way, people's willingness to allow folks to live with them on a temporary or permanent basis. So thinking about the pandemic being like a big piece of that last 4 years. So Arash and Melissa also asked me to think about like also what's changed nationally in the last 4 years since the plan. Obviously, COVID has been a huge piece of the last 2 years in particular. And so some things to like prompt your brains as you're thinking about things for the afternoon. So we heard earlier today, there's been a really robust investment of resources from the federal government and a lot of people with money for the first time. It's been a scarcity mindset in housing and homelessness for a long time. And I think it was your county commissioner that said it's like this historic moment where we have this historic amount of resources to change what the system looks like and to rethink how we operate housing and homelessness. And so it's an opportunity to be innovative with the resources that we have. There's increased coordination among federal partners right now. So everyone has this money at their tables. And there's also been a push from, I sit a lot with HUD, with Housing and Urban Development, and they have recently released House America with the US Interagency Council on Homelessness, which depending on what lens y'all are coming into this room with, it has USICH as they're called, has Department of Ed, Department of Labor, it has Health and Human Services. So depending on the hat that you're wearing here, your federal partner is probably at USICH or at that table. And so it's a call and a convener for those folks as well that to bring everyone to the table. And one of the big things that House America is asking for is to increase physical housing production in communities. I heard this morning that folks were naming that it's really hard to find landlord partners. And so folks have been asked to just build housing, and that has been something that House America is getting behind as well. There's been openness to troubleshooting with partners and sharing best practices. So for those of you who may know this, like HUD has been having weekly office hours calls, which has never happened before. And I know other partners like RYE or also Runaway and Homeless Youth are also having those conversations. And so they're trying to bring the people with the money making the decisions closer to the front lines to hear like what's going on in communities and to amplify what's working well. And so, you could log on to one of those calls and hear those things and then go back to folks in your community and say like, hey, I heard this thing and I want to try it here. There's also we talked about this earlier too, that the needs of young people are changing and have changed through this pandemic. And so being responsive to those changing needs has been really key. The racial justice movement of the past 2 years since George Floyd's murder in May of 2019 has really increased the pace of communities to look at the disparate impacts of homelessness on BIPOC folks, on Black, Indigenous, and people of color, to really dig into their data and what it's telling them and who's showing up in their system and who's being exited in their system, who's coming back. And to target interventions. So I'm thinking of some communities that have, some communities that have used things like zip codes in their cities to say, we understand that this zip code has a ton of BIPOC households, and so that's how we're gonna target resources. And like we've been seeing all day today, people with lived expertise are leading the movement. So the specifics from the plan, I'm gonna push through. This vision's really important because it's the North Star, it's the thing we're all driving towards. You'll know this plan's been successful when youth homelessness in your community is rare, brief, one time, and equitably addressed. The 5 focus areas from the plan, we're gonna talk through 3 of those more this afternoon. Those are the public-private partnerships, so those that require public systems like local government, child welfare, juvenile justice to partner with the private sector to increase solutions. Housing and services, so those are all bricks and mortar housing, tenant-based housing, increasing housing stock, the services that keep people stably housed, and the systems intersectionality. So those are the ones that think about how youth move through different systems. So a lot of times we see young people who are involved with child welfare, juvenile justice, the homeless system, so how that intersectionality works. And then we're not gonna talk about them as much, but fundraising and legislative policy solutions were also 2 focus areas of the plan. And those are more focused on that long-term sustainability. So you heard some of the policy change that's happened in your state that has permanency now because it's a permanent policy change. And then fundraising is obviously the money that gets the job done. So just to highlight, to kind of get your brains moving as we move into this discussion, some innovative housing and services. So we have 2 buckets, so things from the plan that y'all have been working on and things that we didn't capture in the plan in 2018, but that y'all have come up with since then and have started moving on. So youth dedicated outreach staff, you heard about that in the awesome video that we heard earlier. And then in COVID, virtual access to services became more of a standard thing because it had to. And so thinking about other ways that, virtual access can happen. Public-private partnerships, so incentivizing local employers to hire youth, and you've gotten more creative with your landlord relationships. So I heard the county folks talking about that landlord mediation fund that's come up. And then there's been care coordination across your systems, as well as investment in different education pathways, not just the traditional K-12 to higher ed. And I'm getting my wrap-up signal, so I'm done.
Thank you, Lauren. That was awesome. Thank you for that primer. And I'm going to go right to the next section. I'm so happy to be welcoming our next guest today, Ivana Cancela, which is the Chief of Staff for the Nevada Governor, Steve Sisolak, the Nevada Governor. Ivana Cancela is an accomplished public servant, though at her core, she's undoubtedly an organizer. She has a really long bio, and we'd rather hear from her, so I'm gonna keep it short and sweet, but she is a graduate of UNLV's Boyd School of Law, and she has worked throughout her career to unite communities and empower others to lead. She worked for Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. She also helped lead efforts with the largest labor union in the state. And in addition to that, worked on a variety of other federal and state efforts before her life changed in 2016 when she was unanimously appointed to state senate and then became the first Latina to be ever elected to state senate in Nevada. And that deserves a round of applause. So then she resigned her seat from the Senate seat and accepted a presidential appointment But then a couple months after she got that presidential appointment at the U.S. Health and Human Services, Governor Sisolak apparently called and provided an opportunity to be chief of staff, which she could not resist coming back to serve Nevada. So we are grateful that she is back here. And with that, I'd like to invite her up to the stage. Rob's on, yes. So, okay, so for this session, what we want to do is we're going to break it up to 3 topic areas: innovative housing and services, system intersectionality, and public-private partnerships. So we'll have about 10, 12 minutes to share ideas within each topic area. But do you want to start with a few words about Nevada's recovery real quick?
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you all for having me, and thank you all for being here. But most importantly, thank you for all that you do. We have youth across the state that are counting on you, on your resources, on your time, on your energy, and on your ideas. And the governor not only values the work that you all do, but the input and insight that you all have on how we can ensure that hopefully one day we don't need this summit because we don't have homeless youth. The thing I'm most proud of all the work I've done, was working with someone who's really special to me. Her name's Alexis. She was my little sister through Big Brothers Big Sisters. She entered foster care when she was 11. And working with her and knowing her, mentoring her, learning from her, we worked together on a fee waiver program. So foster youth and other similarly situated youth could attend any higher ed institution for 10 years at no cost. It's a big deal, because we know that if given the opportunity, regardless of background, youth will thrive. And we as a community have to make sure that our kids, whether they are in the foster care system or not housed, our most vulnerable kids, that we do our job because they're our responsibility. And there's no question that over the last 2 years during the pandemic, that youth, whether they are in foster care, unhoused, or just at home in tough situations, have felt the brunt of the last 2 years in a way that we still don't have the words to totally understand. It has been really hard for a lot of people, but our kids have had to have some of the most resilience out of any population. Imagine what it's like to learn algebra on a computer. I can barely do basic math on a calculator. So the idea of having to learn new concepts, to learn how to read on a computer. So as we're thinking about our federal funds and about recovery, we have to position our most vulnerable populations at the forefront of our discussions. Whether it is unhoused youth, seniors, individuals whose jobs are not coming back because of the pandemic. The list is long. We have to think about those populations. And the way we're working on getting these dollars out and thinking about recovery is looking at 5 major categories. First is childcare. We've received over $300 million in a block grant to help do everything from create childcare workforce all the way to provide childcare opportunities. The second is economic development. We have to ensure that we are putting dollars into workforce development, into economic diversification, and ensuring that we are really generating the workforce to meet the needs of an economy that desperately needs to diversify. The third is housing. We have a problem in that whether you are in Winnemucca dealing with a shortage of housing or you're in Las Vegas dealing with evictions, housing affects all parts of our state. And we have every housing crisis that in some places are treated in isolation happening somewhere in the state. So we have to invest in housing and making sure that there are more opportunities for everyone from domestic violence victims who need to quickly be rehoused all the way to ensuring we have workforce housing. We have a lot of work to do on housing. Housing is a key priority. There's COVID response. We're going to be dealing with COVID and the pandemic and our broader public health system for a long time. And we have to ensure we have the resources, not only to continue to get people vaccinated in accessible, quick ways, but also to strengthen our public health system so that if and when we are confronted with a crisis that is even a quarter of the size of the pandemic, we are able to meet the response and ensure that we have the systems in place to deal with it. We are using those as our major guideposts. And the last bucket that is related but that has its own set of funds is education. Both the school district and the Department of Education received federal dollars as well. And we are closely working with both entities to ensure those dollars get out in ways that really serve our communities. Our process is going to take some time. There are 106 different allowable Treasury expenses, and we are looking at over 2,500 proposals that have come in. And we have to do the work of matching proposals with allowable expenses, with needs and prioritization, and really ensuring that we are taking what we've heard from the community to make those dollars an investment in our future. And we don't want to come back and get audited 5 years from now and have to pay back millions of dollars. So it is a deliberate process with a lot of urgency to it. And we are quickly staffing up, ensuring that we have the expertise in-house, and reaching out to folks who have submitted proposals for more information so we can get these dollars out and moving. Does that help, Arash? Does that kind of add some color to it?
Perfect primer, perfect
Cool.
primer. Thank you. So you heard it, that one of the 5 things that the governor's team and Nevada is focused on is housing. So let's zoom in a little more and talk about how housing and services that relate to youth experiencing homelessness. So what ideas does the audience have to share about innovative housing and services that you'd like to see in Nevada?
Okay, thank you. And it's Teresa. Where's this one?
Hi, Teresa.
Hi. So starting off with like services and housing, I think this was 2019, when I saw that foster youth got the Foster Youth Success Initiative, I could not help but think how disadvantaged it is that homeless youth do not have that privilege. And it's also a disadvantage because we do have Hope Scholars that offer housing, but we're stuck because we don't have nothing for tuition for the youth. So seeing that, like, oh, we're so close, or like there is an opportunity, or there is a thought to give youth in disadvantaged opportunity or disadvantaged situations. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Okay.
Like opportunity to receive free education, but homeless youth didn't. It was just truly heartbreaking, especially with Hope Scholars, because we have the opportunity to house them, but because we don't have tuition for them, we often see them dropping out, or they have like crazy amount of loans because they have housing, but they don't have the service to maintain like their education.
Mm-hmm.
Some other things I have are hiring youth with lived experiences to lead youth support groups, to inform and lead outreach efforts. And we also need to have fun, flexible access. For example, web-based coordinated entry assessments, and also having traveling mobile case managers. And I think it's time to pilot long-term host homes and establish a 24-hour hotline or app to connect youth to services.
My pen just died, and I'm gonna have to grab another one.
I'll let you borrow mine.
Thank you. Sorry. Will you say the last thing you said one more time, Teresa?
Establish 24-hour hotline or app to connect to youth services.
I love that idea.
Thank you for those great ideas. Can you hear me okay? No. Mic's still not on. Well, I have a couple on. Hello? Hello? Okay. Is that working now? If not, I'll boom. Okay. Does anyone else in the audience have any ideas around housing and services? Okay. Please, over there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm loud enough. So I am new to the Las Vegas area, so what I'm about to say definitely does impact the youth, but just the general public. I hear a lot about all the funding and that we need more housing and all that, which is great, right? But what about the people that are housed now? I have never heard anyone say anything about rent caps. I hear people's rent going up so high, like $300 within the next month. Like, and there's no rent caps for these landlords, and I don't understand that. So to me, that would be something to look at, like having a rent cap of some sort.
Really great idea. Rent caps. Other people, housing and services ideas. Okay, yes, please.
Is it working? Okay, I'm coming in on like another end of it as a landlord. So what are the things that resources available to us, those that are like small landlords, we don't own like giant apartment complexes, maybe just like a small fourplex and things like that, to help us to be able to serve the community more and not have to charge a lot when we're just starting off? What resources or things that we have available?
Perfect. So you're saying basically as a landlord, what can the state do to make it easier for you to participate in providing more affordable housing?
Yes, or if it's already available, maybe we just don't know about it because a lot of people are not looking towards helping those in need because they feel like they don't know how without going into debt, or no one wants to evict, at least I don't want to evict anyone. So what are our lines for that?
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have any ideas on housing and services before we move on to our next section?
Hi, my name's Sandra. I'm faculty in School of Nursing at Nevada State College. So I'm just wondering, I'm so excited to hear about all this funding and all these different innovative housing ideas. And knowing that mental health and lack of mental health services are really is a big factor driving homelessness. I wondered if we're looking at models of housing that also include those very close access to services that are the determinants that kind of, drive that second and third round of homelessness. So, models where, the homeless or the behavioral health services in very close proximity of services would be available to the youth that would be residing there.
So integrated and coupled supportive services with housing. Yeah. Makes sense. Other ideas for housing and services. We got
Hi.
a couple hands over here. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, wait. We can hear you.
You can hear me? Just a suggestion. I do know that there's an organization called Help USA where they house homeless veterans. Can we mimic that program for our homeless youth?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think we had one over here too.
At lunch, we had a real interesting conversation with the last two people who talked, was that would there be something that kind of to look forward, that the people who have been, the homeless who have been in the housing program for a while, would there be some idea of being able to have a parcel of land and that you put in small homes, and that somehow near the end of them aging out of the program, that it could be somehow rent to own so that they get some type of equity when they leave, but then they would also be able to have support services of a housing manager and everything, but everything in a little bit of close proximity, and to create that. And that started our conversation at lunch. It was kind of interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Yeah, renting to own is a very important concept we need to implement. Others?
So an idea that I've talked about, I work for the libraries and I do a lot with teaching people about 3D printing, and 3D printing homes are around the country now, and they've been making communities in Mexico to help with the housing crisis down there. So working with a company to make 3D printed houses, or a company like a local company, Boxable, where they've got foldable houses that just come on a big truck and you just unfold it and you've got a 375 square foot house. So my understanding is they're local. So working with something like them, you could do the small parcel of land with the small house and put them in areas where there might be services nearby.
It's a great idea.
I just want to piggyback off what both of them said. I worked in housing for about 10 years. I'm a librarian now, and the conversation is always about housing people to make them renters. I'm one of those youth. I grew up in foster homes, and the biggest challenge of my life was buying a house. I rented for 22 years. It was the most unstable part of my life, having a master's degree, having the income, but being set up to be a renter and build generational wealth for my children is what breaks that cycle of poverty. So I'm really interested in solutions that set youth up to be homeowners rather than lifelong renters.
That's wonderful, thank you. And we're about to wrap up housing and services. So do any of our young leaders have any final thoughts on this, this portion, housing and services?
Just
yes,
one more.
Jessica.
Am I going or she's going? Hi, Monica.
Oh.
So one of the things that we've been talking about is co-housing as a way to get youth or young families out of poverty and into home ownership. So something we've been working on for a little while is taking existing building stock and renovating that into something that's more like something that is on a co-housing level, where you also have social services and mixed use components in that building. So that might be multifamily housing, say like an abandoned apartment building that maybe gets renovated into new housing for small families or for youth. And then that's a way to lead that group of folks into ownership. And as they grow, you sell those apartments, or those condos is what they would become. And then those folks then move into maybe single family homes or something larger that is more suitable.
Thank you, Monica, our citizen architect. Youth leaders, any final thoughts on this?
Yes, I actually have a list. This is Tyson, hello. Tiny little list. To wrap up, I think that we should start creating comprehensive youth-dedicated outreach with staff who are trained to respond to youth with complex needs. I know that some of this work is already, some of the things that I'm gonna list have already been started, but expanding on that and having any additional supports for that are incredibly necessary. Funding non-time limited community-based housing for youth that operates with a housing first orientation, increasing family engagement counseling and reunification services, piloting additional crisis housing options for youth, including host homes and respite beds. And overall, we do need more flexible funding so that agencies can better support youth and meet them where they're at, and also are better supported in trying to respond and recover from any additional crises that arrive.
Thank you. That was a lot. Did you get all that?
I got most of it.
All right. Okay.
I got the list if you need it.
I think we'll leave her with a copy. Yes. Okay. So now we're going to move on to system intersectionality. System intersectionality is how public and nonprofit systems such as child welfare, juvenile justice, criminal justice, education system, and the homeless services systems can interact with one another. What ideas would the crowd like to share about system intersectionality that you'd like to see in Nevada? Okay, Tyson, hello.
Guess who has another list? It's me again, hello. So for systems intersectionality and
a little slower, just so we can get
a
on
little
there.
slower.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry to talk very fast, but these thoughts are in conjunction between YAC and NPHY ambassadors. So to start, we have creating transition plans for youth who may be enrolled in multiple systems to ensure exit to stable housing, establishing transition support staff to assist youth exiting the homeless services system, train law enforcement and public security about the issues of youth homelessness, what resources are available in the community, and how to assess youth who may be experiencing homelessness, and establishing specialized liaisons to help youth move through systems and meet educational and employment goals.
Tavon, anything you want to add to that?
Well, first, that was a lot. Tavon Jenkins here. Well, I also have a list, so I'm sorry for everybody else. Create an intersectional framework to house, keep, and manage data to improve communications between systems so youth don't have to repeat their stories and re-traumatize themselves every time they seek different services. Establish a data dashboard that is updated regularly, at least monthly. I personally believe it should be bi-weekly, but whatever. That informs an annual youth homeless data report. Hire housing navigators to assist youth experiences and securing stable and adequate housing.
Great ideas.
Thank you.
Others in the audience, would you like to share some ideas on system intersectionality or follow them? Okay, we got one back there.
Hi, Ryan Ocampo, Valley High School classroom educator. I would like to see if any nonprofit organizations can work with the school district to create a district-wide supported after-school program with advisors leading youth-led advocacy. I've seen grassroots organizations at different schools, but nothing that has been spearheaded to my knowledge by the school district. I think the school district can support that by paying advisors and providing training, working with a nonprofit organization that can train and provide a cohesive, I guess, a curriculum or after-school advising program for youth to help them become their own advocates and address the needs at their individual schools. I'm aware of the SOT system, and that helps with individual school needs, but I believe if it's a district-wide initiative, it'll help a lot more.
Wonderful. And what we learned earlier today is that, with the Nevada Department of Education,
One other, looking at it holistically, I think I just add to your group of collaborators, healthcare.
Healthcare, yes. Any other ideas on system intersectionality? Anybody? Okay, one more.
Arash, bring back youth outreach workers. Having more people working in the community, being able to be the voice for the youth who don't have a voice for themselves. A lot of these young people, well, here, you guys are awesome. I've been wanting to say that all day. But everybody doesn't know how to articulate what they need. A lot of youth don't even know what they need.
Mm-hmm.
So having more people in the community to be able to be the arms in the community to connect them to these resources.
All great ideas, thank you. Oh, right over here we got one, I think. Yep, there we go.
Hello, my name's Dr. Cunningham, and one of the ideas that I have is streamlining the intake and assessment processes that we have in place. A lot of times what we see when we're dealing with youth and families is a new term I learned that's called transinstitutionalization, where they are, whether in shelters, child welfare, juvenile justice, we're seeing some of the same names, the same families, and so if there's a way to streamline the intake process and that not to become another barrier or cumbersome paperwork, and we are able to establish, whether that's memorandums or business associate agreements with agencies that we're partnering with, I think that this could potentially help the families as we're sharing and releasing information to make sure that that youth or that family is not submitting the same paperwork and copies of the same thing in order to get resources. And so if there's a way to streamline or create a system where if they're involved with, Nevada Youth, or they're involved with Hope, or if they're involved in any door they came into, that collaboration that we have with one another, if that information is in the system, and it can be shared so that it doesn't become a barrier to our youth and families getting services or having to complete yet another intake, which we know could be very discouraging for a family or youth in crisis.
Absolutely. That's echoed by what our young leaders said too, so that's an important one. Any other final thoughts on this before we move on to our final ideation section? Okay, seeing none, hearing none. Oh, well, I just did a board thing, sorry. Okay, we're going to move on now. So now we're going to move on to public-private partnerships, which are businesses' relationships with nonprofits and government. What ideas would you all like to share about public-private partnerships you'd like to see in Nevada? All right, Mr. Tavon Jenkins.
That is me, once again, back on the track. Well, first, I love all three of these, but training all community teams, outreach teams, in the best practices to interacting with vulnerable youth, which means not going around and telling people, you know, things that might trigger them, like, hey, you see that bus stop over there, that might not be a good idea. Conduct outreach to potential landlord partners to encourage them to house young people. This is a big one for me. I just recently started living by myself, and let me tell you, it was very hard to find my first apartment because somebody's like, oh, he's 20. I mean, he's 20-something. Is he really going to pay his bills? It was a nightmare. And my personal favorite, have police conduct know your rights trainings and community focus about your youth homelessness. Thank you.
Great ideas. Okay, perfect. And then does any other young leader have anything to say about this? All right.
I have things to say.
Okay.
Going
We
off
know
a
you
list.
do.
No, Tracy again. Hi. So we had to create and distribute outreach materials that reflect diverse populations, of youth experiencing homelessness. Provide and promote tutoring and workforce development programs such as vocational trainings at schools to improve access at sustainable careers and lastly, we have to incentivize employers to hire youth who are currently or formerly homeless, building connections.
Absolutely. Okay, audience, any ideas on public-private partnerships we can share?
I just wanted to kind of like touch back on what was just said about, you know, incentivizing employers to employ homeless youth. I think what comes along with that too, I mean, it's one great thing to, you know, give them incentives to, you know, hire these youth. And at the same time, I think that they need to have an adequate amount of education around the issues affecting homeless youth, because I wouldn't want a homeless youth to be hired and then immediately, like, you know, maltreated in some way because the employer doesn't understand the specific nuances that go into life as a homeless youth. So I think that giving them education on what it means to be homeless out here, you know, that could include like maybe giving a little bit more leniency as far as transportation goes, or like, you know, understanding that maybe this youth doesn't always have clean clothes to wear, or like maybe they don't come in groomed in the way that they need. So being able to inform employers about the specific, you know, issues that they face, I think that would also help, you know, retain, you know, employees at these jobs and, you know, build a better relationship between the employer and their employees.
I'm actually happy you brought up that point, and I want to add this, that any new like process, new resource, I think needs to come with training one way or another, even if it's new staff or new environment, new people, new like anything, like training needs to be involved so we know that we're on the same board, or I mean on the same page, and make sure that when we are like providing resources to our people, that it's done effectively and like without traumatizing them, and not putting them in worse positions.
Trainings that are informed by youth with lived experience specifically.
Exclamation point.
I think one that we need to think about, especially in Southern Nevada, that we've kind of been talking about indirectly when we're talking about proximity of services, are the transportation barriers that our young people face. And I think there's some really good opportunities around public-private partnerships that we could pursue. Oh, there we are. That we could pursue to help really alleviate that issue, because it's you know, from a provider perspective, that's a really significant issue that our young people face, trying to get from point A to point B. Is someone whispering at me? Oh, Tavon's trying not to choke or laugh at me. Yeah. We'll get him some water. Oh, yeah, so anyway, transportation could be a good one. And specifically, there has been the idea tossed around of working with RTC and getting some funding to maybe even create, like, you know, special bus lines that help young people get from all the different access points that they need to alleviate that barrier and save resources along the way. Any other ideas on public-private partnerships? Could be employment, could be policy. Oh, we got one back there.
Hello again. I'm not sure if this is quite a partnership, but one of the things at the library district we've been talking about is how there's kind of a gap in how we serve young adults. And, you know, at the library district, we pride ourselves on serving everyone. And so we would really be interested in how we can partner to serve that gap between like 18 to, you know, early 20s, because, you know, we have our young people, we've got tons of services, there's tons of support. And then once they hit 18, now they're adults. And if they're not in a supportive environment like a university or in their parents' home, or if they're experiencing homelessness, what are the supports for the young adults that are just kind of getting into that level of independence? So I think that's something that probably every youth serving organization should think about, is how we serve the youth that become adults. So we're thinking about the library district, but we'd be open to partnering and figuring out ways to serve that community better.
Thank you. Any other ideas on public-private partnerships? Okay, seeing none, hearing none. All right. Well, Ivana, you've heard some of the ideas coming from all of us. Would you like to say a few final words before we part ways?
I think, is mine working? Kind of?
Mm.
We'll just go with it. Sure. Thank you so much. It's really, really important not only to have the space to share these kinds of ideas, but to acknowledge that those closest to the problem are also those closest to the solutions. And thank you not only for sharing, but for ensuring that those voices are not only prominent, but the loudest. That's how we make good change, not the kind of change that we then have to go back and fix. I've heard a lot. I really appreciate it. I take a lot of notes, so I gotta go back and make sure that I can read all my notes, which is the hard part. But we have a real opportunity. We have spent the last 2 years in what have probably been some of the hardest moments for a lot of people. Really hard. Really, really, really hard. And through that, we have built new partnerships. Folks who perhaps have never worked together are deep in partnership now, and leveraging those networks, those conversations, those communication structures to frame how we think about the next chapter of Nevada, to think about how we do things better, how we turn crisis into opportunity. That's the vision of the governor. It's my work as his chief of staff to ensure our state is focused on that. And I can't do it alone. None of us can really do big things alone. I wouldn't be an organizer if I didn't leave with an ask, and that is for your continued and committed help. I know that there's a lot to do, and I know that I know a little about a lot of things, but your expertise, your influence, your voices are critical to this work. So if it's okay, could I enlist you all in helping us make sure that we do things correctly? Yeah, kind of, yeah, sort of, yeah? Good, thank you. What's that?
What was that? Oh, a little early, but you know, we got to get through a, you know, Native Day, yeah.
Like, let's eat turkey first.
Exactly. Gobble, gobble, and then we can talk about Christmas. Anyway, Ivana, thank you so much for your time and for listening. And Ivana has to get going right back to the governor to get these notes to him right away so we can get this implemented. So really, again, thank you for taking the time to come out here and listening. And lastly, thank you for being part of the movement to end youth homelessness here in Southern Nevada, and for you, all of Nevada. Yeah. So thank you. And I quickly just want to say, while Ivana leaves, oh, thank you, that you guys may have noticed that Nevada Treasurer Zach Konak cannot join us. He really wanted to be here, and he would have been a treat, but not as cool as Ivana. But he would have been a treat as well. But he was stuck in court, helping our state with finances, I assume. So we got you, and we have great ideas that we shared today, and we'll be sure to follow up with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Everyone, let's give her a round of applause. So we're about to wrap up soon, but young leaders, sorry, they're networking. That's an important function. Young leaders, are there any? Look at that. Anyway, young leaders, do you have any final words you want to share? Of course. All right, then come up here. Well, here. Come up here. Come up here.
I just want everybody to see my outfit again.
And those orange shoes.
That's not why I came up here. But my final thoughts for the day, a lot of great discussions, a lot of great networking was done, but I don't want us to lose momentum once we exit this auditorium. I'm hoping, expecting even, for us to really not just continue to have the same conversations throughout this next year, and then having the same conversation for the next summit about having more collaborations and having more youth. They just need to happen, okay? And so I'm hoping that, or I'm expecting that youth are involved in the collaborations that we're talking about. When we're talking about systems intersectionality, when we're talking about public-private partnerships, that youth are required to be there, as in youth voice is required for us to move forward. I had another point, but my notes are over there. I'm going to be back in like 2 seconds. It's more like 4 seconds, but that's fine. Nobody counted but me. So I want us to start, and I noticed this a lot in the panel, that we're talking a lot about just creating spaces for youth and creating opportunities for youth, but I really want us to take that a step further and start envisioning and stepping into a reality where that's just there. Like, these spaces are already set and established, so we don't just keep continuing the same conversations of we need more space, but we're actually past that point where the space is there, and that way it can't be an afterthought and it can't be forgotten because it's already a requirement, it's expected, it's built into whatever we're doing. Those are my thoughts.
Well, I really don't have much to say after that. No, but seriously, I hope that that this was an inspiring and educational and motivating summit. What we want to kind of reiterate is that we really are stressing here that this is really the time to be bold. This is really the time to be innovative. And this is the time to make sure that we do not go back to the way things were, but really that we create new paradigms and new realities that work better. And we learned today that the only way that's going to work for this sector and for this population, if it's for youth, by youth. So that means that everything we do has to have young people incorporated from the beginning to end. We need to reevaluate everything that we have been doing and how we can do it better. And that's probably going to start by asking our young people, how can we do it better? And then going from there, and then listening. So we also had a really incredible performance, the abolition of normal, which, again, really exemplifies the theme of today. We're trying to get rid of normal, trying to create a new reality that is led by young people. And then the rest of us, our role is just simply to support. This is simply to remove barriers and make that happen. But they are the ones that can inform us on what are our opportunities and what are our challenges. And that is really an important part of today's messaging. You've heard that there's lots of opportunities for funding, for collaboration, and I couldn't agree more with the people today and our young leaders that it is the time to stop talking. We have a lot of resources in our community right now, and it is the time to start doing. And the last thing I'll say is that what we want, whatever we invest in it needs to be sustainable. It needs to live beyond this temporary infusion of monies and resources. So when we're thinking of ideas, we want to think of ideas that really build permanent impact. For example, figuring out ways that young people can rent to own, figuring out other mechanisms that create permanent housing solutions as opposed to just a one-time rental subsidy, things like that. And of course, uplifting youth voice more, creating more career pathways that make sense for our young people as well, that aren't barriers but are easily accessible and that they can be educated on and decide if that's something that they want to pursue. And of course, we cannot think about, we cannot forget about something important, which is mental health, and making sure that, that really was exacerbated and the light was really shined brighter on that during COVID. And we need to make sure we have enough resources in our communities actually working for our young people when it comes to mental health on top of everything else we discussed. So with that, I want to make sure that we let everyone know that of course I lost my notes, but anyway, we will be posting some new content from the summit and some takeaways from today, as well as the animation and several other things on our movement website. So we want you all to check that out. And again, I want to thank all of our panelists, all our presenters. I especially want to thank our young leaders, and I want to thank everyone that came here today, and for all of you out there virtually that also joined us and are also part of the movement. So thank you all for everything. Anything I forgot? Anything I need to mention? Okay, great. In that case, it is 2:52 and we are out of here. Thank you for joining Summit 21.